Welcome everyone again to episode 2 of our Building Reboot webinar series. So good to have you guys with us again. Now the name Building Reboot, I just thought I'd touch on that. The definition of reboot is to make a change in something in order to establish a new beginning. So this series is all about taking advantage of the fact that the pause button has been hit on the whole building industry and looking at trying to make some changes in the way we operate with that time. If you're new this week, my name's Tim Haycock. I'm director here at High Performer Building, along with my father Lester. You'll have visited our website when you registered for this series, and if you look on the right-hand side of your screen, which is the way my fingers are going, in the handout section, you can download our brochure. That's just a short brochure, kind of gives you an overview what we're about. And yeah, we're absolutely wrapped with the turnout last week, record number of registrants and percentage of those tuning in. So we're really grateful both for Cameron and him sharing his thoughts, and also for you all for spreading the word amongst your networks. This is a really important conversation we're having, obviously, and we're humbled that you are all prepared to engage in it. We're rapt to let you know also that Cameron Baggery has agreed to give us fortnightly updates going forward. So we've asked him to do that so that as an industry, we can keep our finger on the pulse. Every day there's updates coming out from the government, the markets all over the place. Projects are up in the air, and we still have no idea really what's happening in the international markets or what a more or less global New Zealand might look like. So stay tuned in. So if you're in for next week's webinar, you'll see Cameron's update in with that. There was also lots of positive feedback last week on the fact that this industry has a lot of room for improvement, particularly in the area of earning back trust. And in terms of where we've lost trust with the New Zealand public, I've got to say the biggest thing's probably financial management, which is why Lara's talk today is so critical. People have either flat out lost money, or more commonly, if not consistently, finished with a bill higher than they were expecting at the start of the job. And that's just a tricky thing, but it's worth us having a look at. Yeah, on a side note, I want you to know that we'd love to talk to you about high performer building outside this platform. To be honest, now's a great time to be talking to our suppliers. Normally it's a pain in the butt to stop and talk about a new product and you don't have time to look into it properly. Well, now you do. So I encourage you to make time for that. There should be a poll popping up there on the right. You can respond to that if you'd be keen to engage with us or the suppliers on that. So awesome. Let's bring in Lara. Lara, if you can turn your mic and camera back on. Hopefully it works this time. And while you do that, there you go. Let me introduce you. Guys, Lara is a director at PWC, and everyone I spoke to at PWC said, you've got to have Lara speak. She's the best person in that space of construction. Lara's been doing some work with the master builders as well as on the construction accord. And she was the lead on the receivership team for Bridgecorp, and maybe more relevantly for us, eBert Construction. So while it might seem a bit depressing to be bringing in the receivers at the moment, Lara knows a lot about what's gone wrong and what we can do better. So I don't know about you guys, but I'd rather learn from other people's errors than make my own, if that's an option. And also, like last week, feel free to fire through questions in the chat section, and we'll put those to Lara at the end of her talk. Great. Over to you, Lara.
Thanks, Tim. And hopefully you should all be able to see a slide deck up on the screen, which is far better to look at than I am. Look, I'm here today to talk about financial resilience, and I'm not here today to solve the world's problems or to talk a lot more about the reasons for the failures of the past, the Mainzeals, the Ebbets, the Arrows. I think those have been rehashed and dissected more than enough. We've all talked about them. And I did notice pre the current situation that there'd been a real shift in approach, and everybody was starting to talk about making some positive change as opposed to negative talk about what had happened and why it happened. So it's about prevention and about how to take it forward. What I'll talk through today is I'll set the scene, have a look at what the desired outcomes in the sector are, what was being done beforehand, and what is still being done. What else can the sector do to help itself? And by the sector, incidentally, I don't just mean contractors, I mean every part of the sector, every stakeholder, suppliers, tradies, clients, consultants. Then we'll go have a look at a little bit of a recap and any questions at the end. So excuse my technical difficulties here. I'm operating with two screens with the same slide set on, so I have to move them both at the same time. In terms of setting the scene, look, there's no question at the moment that future revenue is uncertain. We don't really know how long it's going to be before things are back up and running fully again. There's going to be some transitional phases. There will be some projects that get delayed or cancelled or mothballed, but we're all in the same boat, and we've just got to recognise that that uncertainty is there and needs to be dealt with. There will be challenges, and there have always been challenges around procurement and labour. That hasn't changed. That's nothing to do with COVID-19. That's always been there. A lot of planning and a lot of third-party assistance is going to be needed. Now, by third-party assistance, I don't just mean the government. I just mean looking around and going, what do I need to make this work? And when I say, what do I need? What does our project need, or what do our group of projects need? Can't emphasize enough that if we're going to get some good, or at least not quite so bad outcomes out of this whole situation, then it has to be a shared responsibility. No one party on a project is going to make it work. Everybody's going to have to work together, going to have to compromise, going to have to find a way through. That goes again on to being proactive about it. Don't wait to hear what you need to do. Start thinking about, hey, I've got some ideas about how we could make this work. Don't be afraid to speak up about them. Internally, it's about going, I've talked a couple of times previously about businesses need to help themselves. And there are some definite areas where in the construction sector, there's been evidence in the past that there've been perhaps areas not neglected, but when you get busy, they tend to go on the back burner. Now is the time where you can set your business up to be better when we do get back on track again. Oops. So what do we want to get out of this at the end of the day? So COVID-19, what's the objective around COVID-19? Well, that's about getting resilience and getting an effective recommencement of construction work across all parts of the sector, whether they be civil, vertical, or residential. So it's how do we get this thing back up and running again? How do we get some momentum? How do we kickstart it? But forgetting COVID-19 for a moment, just thinking about the sector as a whole, what does the sector want to be? It needs to be sustainable, and it needs to be successful for everyone. Nobody wins, and certainly the New Zealand economy doesn't win when the construction sector is not firing on all cylinders. It's a huge part of our economy. It employs, from memory, and stats are not my thing, I think it employs about 9% of the labour force, and it's hugely important to the overall health of New Zealand. So what do we want to do to get to those desired outcomes? As Tim mentioned earlier, the number one thing is building trust and confidence, so that people will work better together. I think there has been far too much prevalence in particularly the last 3 to 5 years, of quite adversarial behaviour between different parties on a contract. It's a them and us situation instead of we're all trying to get a building that's built on time for the right price, and everybody makes some money, everybody comes out of it okay. We want to sort of promote some consistency and understanding of, well, what are the key drivers of success for the sector? Is it improved productivity? Is it lower building prices on a square metre basis? Is it what does success look like for the industry? And make sure everybody is shooting for the same goal. We definitely want to improve the workforce development and retention. What tends to happen because of the cyclical nature of the construction sector is we have these big booms and then we have the big dips, COVID-19 notwithstanding. And then during the big dips, we don't retain that workforce. So when the boom comes again, we don't have enough people. And I'm not just talking about tradies, that's right across the workforce. includes consultants, it includes project management, it includes trades. We want to shift contracting behaviour to an outcome, not a process-driven process. I think when I talk about that, it's more about going, all of the contracts and all of the documentation that we spend hours poring over, that should support what you want to do on a project. It shouldn't drive it. You decide what your outcomes are, you decide the principles that you want to apply to get there, and all the documentation simply supports that and makes sure everybody knows where they stand. Far too often, the first thing people do, and I'm sure that the first thing people did when the shutdown first got announced, was look to the contracts to see what's my legal position. And that's not wrong. You obviously do need to know your legal position. But at the same time, don't let your legal position get in the way of a good outcome. If two parties need to agree on a change to the contract in order to get the building over the line so they both win, that's not, don't immediately go to, I want to enforce. Increasing business skills and capability. And I think that's something that the construction or the contractors part of the sector has acknowledged that it really wants to do within itself and help build within itself. Master Builders is a big player in that space. And encourage and support self-improvement. At the end of the day, nobody's going to do it for you. You're going to have to do it yourself. We're all in that same boat. And I think that's a running theme as you go through this. But ultimately, if everybody can get through these difficult times and get back up and running again and take advantage of the time to put some of these more sustainable skills in place, then you've got a much better chance coming out the other side and for normal operation again. So what is or was being done around improvement for the construction sector? There is the Construction Sector Accord that is made up of both government representatives and representatives from across the industry, both from organisations like Master Builders and the Specialist Trade Contractors Federation, to consultants and architects, through to representatives from some of the larger construction players, and infrastructure is joining the party as well. So there's a reasonable steering group that's been pulled together. And what's happened now is that the Construction Accord website and the Construction Accord itself has become the conduit for communicating the government's response for the construction sector to COVID-19. So they've developed a COVID-19 response plan. They've put some initiatives in there to try and help, try and get some more support out there. To date, some of you may have seen, they've issued what they call the Shovel Ready initiative, which is looking for infrastructure projects, both vertical and horizontal, that could be shovel ready in the next 6 months to give a pipeline for all parts of the sector to work on. So that there's some work to be done. And they're going to help with, I believe, funding support for those projects. They have also issued contracting guidance to all government agencies. They've been pretty blunt that if there's a 3910 contract in place, the contractor is entitled to a variation as a result of the suspension of works. They've encouraged agencies to look at alternatives or mechanisms to help mitigate the ongoing costs and mitigate the risk of financial difficulties for their contractors and for the rest of the supply chain through forward payments, advance payments, looking at paying weekly or fortnightly instead of paying monthly. They've even suggested they consider releasing things like retentions and bonds to give some contractors flexibility. And they've put a mechanism in place, although I think it's still being developed, that if an agency believes that a part of their supply chain is facing difficulty and it will cause an ongoing problem for the project and for the sector, they can put forward a bespoke proposal to MB for consideration for other relief. Whilst that's not a fix-all, those types of activities will help build a stronger sector and help it through the recovery process. The other pre-existing industry initiatives, two that I'm aware of, one is the development of guidelines of what is a good construction company. This work was going on since late last year, so is not in response to COVID-19. What it looks at is the financial, commercial, and operational factors of a company, and what should it look like? Because being financially resilient isn't just about having enough money in the bank. It isn't just about having enough capital or having enough assets to spread around. It's about how you manage your company and you keep it resilient. You keep making money to build that capital. So the guidelines that are being developed and were rolled out through a roadshow to Master Builders members, they talk about things like staff management, staff wellness, staff turnover, training. When it comes to staff, from a governance perspective, how far ahead do you plan? How often do you reassess your plans? How often do you review your major projects? The other thing that has been rolled out recently has been a risk management upskill program where some of the larger contractors have been sharing their policies and processes with others. It's been a very open process. I think Naylor Love have shared a number of their internal guidelines around how they do risk management on major projects. And there are other training initiatives around that under development there. On this slide deck, which I think will be made available after this presentation, the links to both the Master Builders and the Construction Accord site are there. The reason for that is they both contain COVID-19 resources, including around what to do during the recovery. I know that there's some work going on about how you can transition from the different levels and how you could operate a site under the different levels as the government moves us forward. I've somehow managed to get myself tangled up here. One moment. So what else can we do? Sector fluctuations, you've got to plan for the ongoing variability. If nothing else, you're going to have to be flexible as you go forward here. But at the same time, that kind of flexibility and adaptability needs to be there in any event, regardless of C19. Being able to think on your feet, being able to go, hey, I can look at another option to get the right outcome, and look at what is the best for project solution. That's a culture shift that really needs to occur at all levels of the sector, and I do mean at client, consultant, and contractor level. Never lose sight of what you're trying to get to. That's just reinforcing that point I made before, that the approach and contractual arrangements are the support structure for getting to what you want, not the driver of them. And I had something slightly less polite written under collaborate, don't compete, but I decided to remove the swear words. Leave one-upmanship at the door. It isn't about egos when you walk into a room. If there are contractors, subcontractors, consultants, and clients in the room, remember you're all trying to get to the same outcome, and it's not about going, hey, I got one over on the other person. That might sound a bit blunt, but it has been prevalent in the industry over the last few years. In terms of getting into the nitty-gritty of financial resilience and maintenance, I've highlighted the first bullet point on this page because it's particularly important right now. Cash is king. And right now, people are struggling with the availability of cash. Revenue's gone down. There's not a lot floating around. You have to prioritize what you're going to spend your money on. If there is something that isn't absolutely essential to the operation of your business as an overhead, then you have to cut it in the meantime. But more importantly, on an ongoing basis, cash is still king at all times. The construction sector has a strong cash flow in its projects, but as many of you will be aware, at the start of a project and at the end of a project, it tends to be cash poor because you've got setup costs or completion costs that change it slightly at those two times. And what we've seen a lot in the past is that people haven't recognized how many projects are starting and finishing at the same time. They haven't had that visibility of their cash flow over the next 3, 6, 12 months to see when there might be some dips coming. This is particularly true when you're growing your business and when your business is shrinking slightly or you're taking a step back in the market. That's one of the reasons that a number of failures have occurred in the past, is those shocks haven't been anticipated and there's nothing you can do once it's happened. You need to plan for it. So in terms of that, having a clear understanding of what your cash flows are, at least over the next 3 month period, rolling, is really key to making sure that you can maintain some financial resilience, because you have time to go, oh, I'm coming up to a dip. I've got 2 months to figure out how to sort that out, rather than waiting till the dip gets there and trying to find a way through. Because then you end up fighting fires and not focusing on running your actual business. You need to understand and actively manage the things that drive your cash flow, your client payments and claims, the retention status that you have. If you've got retentions owing on a project, make sure you know when the release is coming up and you know that you've got all of your ducks in a row to do it. Don't just wait for the end of the period and then think, right, I'll apply for I'll say the wrong thing here, defects liability certificate, and just get them released. Make sure you're planning ahead for them. Know your contracts and know your projects. Know what the key conditions of your contracts are. Again, don't let it become a surprise to you. Third thing down there for financial resilience is understand your strengths. There are two things that I have seen repeatedly over the years when I've been dealing with construction companies that have been, and subcontractors that have been going through difficulties. One is I do something well, so I'll do twice as much of it and I'll do twice as well, which is infinitely untrue. The other is, well, I'll do this. I need to expand, so I'll go into an area that I don't necessarily know a lot about, but I'll be fine because I'm good at it. My old boss used to say to me, stick to your knitting. If you are good at something, know what your strengths are and really focus in on those. If you're going to expand into another area, do it in a controlled manner. Go, okay, I'll dip my toe in with a small project, then build on that as you build your knowledge. Same thing applies for growing your business in busy times. If you're going to increase your turnover, do it in steps so that you know that you've got enough staff, you've got enough resources, and you've got enough capacity to do it well. Because there's one thing that's true across the board is when a construction project goes wrong, it doesn't tend to go a little wrong, it tends to go badly wrong from a financial perspective. So really looking at that controlled growth, making sure that you're not putting people out of their depth on projects because you're running out of people, you're running out of capacity. It will come back to bite you. Claim all that you're entitled to and address variations quickly. Too often I see projects or companies that have gone wrong, and you look at the last claim or the last payment schedule, and you notice at the back piles and piles of unapproved variations that kind of get left until the end of the project, and then they get argued about. And by then it usually becomes quite a dispute, and people aren't on the same page about what was going to happen with them. So one sort of initiative that we've suggested repeatedly is, if you've got a variations policy, have a date by which variations are supposed to be resolved. Otherwise, it gets elevated up through your company to find out why they're still sitting there on the claim month after month, but not being approved or not being priced. Communication. There is nothing worse than not talking to your clients, your staff, and your supply chain when you're trying to make a project go well. You're all in it together, and you may as well share what you can. You don't have to share trade secrets, but you do have to go, hey, let's find a way through this together. In terms of COVID-19 and financial resilience, make sure that you've looked at all of the support that you can access. The government is announcing more and more, excuse me, every day. The wage subsidies there, the bank funding guarantee, which is becoming affectionately known as the big friendly giant. That's there, and it is, banks have started calling for applications. Excuse me. There's the shovel-ready projects, and the government has also announced various things around other matters like commercial leases, and said that there is more coming. So make sure you keep up to date on what those are. I think the Construction Accord website probably has links to what they might be, as does the Master Builders website. You don't have to be a member to access that part of the Master Builders website, so it's all there, all the resources are available. This is probably, for right now, one of the most important things that I think we can talk about. You need to be planning now for how you are going to recover from this. Sitting back and waiting for the government to tell us when we're going to come out of lockdown, and I understand we were advised today that we're going to get an announcement on the 20th, and we won't be out of level 4 until at least the 23rd. So that gives 3 days. You don't want to be doing all your planning over those 3 days. Wasted time means more money down the drain. So you need to be thinking now, how am I going to be able to work under the different levels? If we stay at level 4 for a bit longer, are there ways that we can work that could be put forward to MB under level 3, 2 and 1? You need to know a few things about that. You need to think about how quickly can my teams mobilise, my staff mobilise? Do they have other things that they're reliant on? Do they have children at home that they're going to have to take care of because schools may not be open? Do I have to take that into account as to how available they will be to do the work if the project gets started? Be talking to your supply chain, be it trades, be it suppliers. Are the materials that you need to restart your project or restart work going to be available? Are your tradies set up to restart again? What are their priorities? What other projects were they working on? Are they going to be available to you? You don't want to find that out 3 days before you're due to start back on site. Be talking to all of your clients. Have they decided what's going to happen with the project? And I'll talk mainly about, as an example, an easy example is a larger project. There are a number of hotel projects that are not proceeding. They're going into hibernation or they're going to be delayed for a period of time. Find out from your clients what their thoughts are around their project. If there are funding issues, are they able to fund the project going forward? Has that changed over the C19? And for each project, what do they see as the critical activities? Agree it between yourselves so that you can plan ahead and make sure that you're not losing another 3 or 4 days when you are able to re-access the sites. Think about whether there are options for working on that site in what are called silos. Are there ways to have people on site where they can maintain social distancing or maintain a level of safety that is acceptable without having everyone back on site? Because I don't think we're going to go from one to the other. There is going to be a transition. It's going to be slow. And it's much better to think, well, how could I rearrange the programming and rearrange the project rather than go, well, I'll just wait until we can go fully on site again. Again, that will be money down the drain. And we are now heading into winter. And I'm sure that there are some weather tightness issues on half-finished projects out there as well. Think about whether or not you may need to seek concessions around the resource consent hours of construction for your project. I'm sure councils have got that front of mind as well, and government has made it very clear that they are looking to see whether there are things that they can do to facilitate getting the economy back up and running again. So allowing perhaps, I don't know, shift work of different trades at different times, but outside the currently consented hours might help projects get up and running again without quite as much excessive cost as already there. If you do have a transitional plan for the different levels, try and find out whether you're going to need to get approval for that. Example I'll use would be the Mad Butcher when they got shut down shortly after the lockdown, and they had to throw out or freeze a whole lot of meat. You do not want to get everything lined up, everything ready to go, and then find out that MB or someone else says, oh no, you can't do that. So have a think about what you might need to ask for permission for. Another thing that you can plan for now to get back up, are there any design issues on the project that were pending resolution? Were there any RFIs outstanding? Can we deal with those now while we don't have a lot else going on the site to make sure when we do get back up and running again, you can be sprinting? Another way to take advantage of the downtime is thinking about upskilling. I'll use as the example, and I'm sure there are others, the RMBA Elevate platform. I'm aware that they have courses around business planning basics, around pricing, around understanding guarantees and contracts, and dispute resolution. Those things, there might be members of your team that are sitting at the moment, you're going, actually, that's a skill I want them to develop over time. They may as well start doing some of that training now. I'm aware for residential builders, there's a webinar next Wednesday afternoon on the Elevate platform around cash flow management during COVID-19. So that's, again, something to encourage your staff to sort of log on and do that. That will, I'll read the spiel on that one. You'll be provided with guidance on best practice cash flow management in a residential construction business. It's going to be an interactive event. And the presenter, who is one of my colleagues from our Christchurch office, Peter Cody, will be there to answer questions that people may have. When I look at what else you can do while you've got some downtime, improve some documentation. Those processes, forms, and templates that support the business that you do, make sure that they're all consistent across the board. Make sure you've got them in place so that it's easier for you to run your business and get those outcomes when you're back up and running again. All those things, all those jobs that you went, oh, I'll get around to that when we have a bit of downtime. Well, that downtime is here now. Revisit policies around health and safety and other issues, particularly taking into account what your plans are through the various levels of government levels during C19. Take stock of your business and go, okay, what is the core of my business? What do I need to focus on going forward? What are my priorities? What's my number 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 to make sure that I'm doing everything I need to do? Don't try to do absolutely everything. Think about what's the most important to keeping your business running. Make sure that you are talking to your staff members to get their input on that. They've been helping you run your business, or you may be self-employed. Talk to yourself. Talk about what the future planning is. Get their input. Nobody has had to deal with anything like this before in this marketplace. Everybody's feeling the pain. Everybody's entering into the unknown. So there are no bad ideas. Preparing forecasts and scenarios. So I talked before about cash flow. This is the perfect time to try and put together a 3-month rolling cash flow. No, there's not a lot of certainty out there, but you go, this is what I hope to be able to do. If that doesn't happen, I've got to have a plan B. I've got to have a plan C. There may even be a plan D. So you need to start thinking about, these are the things that will affect me. If they do happen, or if something goes wrong, how am I going to react to it? What's my critical supply chain? Am I reliant on materials arriving from overseas to get the bathroom section in a house, or in an apartment building, or in a hospital, whatever you happen to be working on? And think about, well, what do I do if that can't happen? What's my contingency plan? If my number 1 priority, or my number 1 critical supply chain factor falls over on me. Same with your trades. Talk to them. If they are open enough to admit, hey, I'm going to have a problem delivering on this for you, think about what your second choice might be. The next couple of slides are actually slides that were prepared for a seminar that was due to take place before COVID-19 hit us. So they are no different from what I would have said to the sector before, and they haven't changed. What else can the sector do to help make it more financially resilient and prevent the failures that we've seen in the past? Making sure you've got adequate governance and process in place. You've got org charts. Now, understand who in your business does what, who's got authority to do what. What are your health and safety principles? What are your claims and instructions processes? Make sure they're consistent. Make sure your clients know how you're going to be dealing with your claims. What's your site reporting? What's your controls that you have over your projects? How often do you review them? Risk management and contingency planning, as I just mentioned, if you've got a critical part of your supply chain, make sure you've got a backup plan. Again, that's not just about C19. You should always have a backup plan for critical things that affect your business. And just because I need to harp on about it again, variations management is absolutely key to the financial success of a project. If you get a variation, deal with it as quickly as you can. If you've got projects that have got variations on them pending right now, this is the perfect time to price them all, get them out there and try and get agreement. So when you go back on site, doesn't need to be dealt with anymore. It's not a complication for the project. And the sort of bottom line on that one is, if something isn't working, just change it. Be prepared to go, this is the policy I've put in place. I'm actually finding in practice that's not working. Change it. Your business, your choices. Communication. You've got to be clear and accurate in what you say. Quite often when we see projects go wrong or companies go wrong, it's because everybody's been gone, oh, I've got a problem on this project, but I'll deal with it myself, or I'll find a way through it, or I'll be able to save money here, or I'll spend my contingency, or I'll get some variations. When honestly, the earlier you go, hey, I'm going to pick up the phone and say, there is something that we need to do to make this project more successful, and see whether there's a way through it that you can work on with the people on the project, not just yourself. And that might not necessarily be the client. That might be working with your subcontractors to go, hey, can we find a way to make this work? It's not a competitive, it's not a them and us, it's a we're in this together. And this is more important than ever in the current circumstances. Understand what the milestones on key projects are for you. So what's the next milestone you've got to hit to know that you're heading towards success on that project? And that's success for yourself, success for what you want as an outcome. Here's the depressing slide. These are the two things that obviously things will go wrong. I mean, there is nothing anybody can do to avoid that, whether it be in a C19 scenario, whether it be in a normal scenario. Issues will come up, problems will happen. Be clear on what your legal and contractual position is, but don't be wedded to it. Go, I know what my position is, so that gives me my negotiating point, but I want to find a solution. You cannot contract for all scenarios. God knows it's been tried over the last 10 or so years, as we've watched special conditions outweigh general conditions by about 4 to 1. Go to the table early. Again, if there's something to be talked about, talk about it. Both sides need to be reasonable. Actually, all sides need to be reasonable to make sure that you get the right outcome. You cannot win by being too competitive with each other on the same project. And then there's the last point, and it comes back to Tim going, why have we got a receiver in here? Look, despite the best intentions in the world, there will always be insolvencies, whether they be a developer, whether they be a consultant, a contractor, a subcontractor, or even a supplier. They do happen. They don't happen for nefarious reasons all the time. People in New Zealand want to do well at business. Nobody goes into something intending to fail, but sometimes, despite all the best intentions in the world, it happens. If it does happen and you have had contingency plans in place for those things, you'll have a better way through. Also important to understand what the constraints are under an insolvency scenario. Often businesses will be able to continue to trade. Seldom will that be a head contractor, although they are able to provide assistance in transitioning projects. There are no cookie cutter solutions. Probably the last thing that comes down to is, as much as everybody understands the anger when somebody who you are working with, whether they are paying you or you are paying them, fails, you've got to swallow that anger and focus on the outcome. You can still be angry and you can do it later, but you need to focus on making sure you're working through the issues first, because the number one important thing is making sure the project has the best outcome for your business that it can. And sometimes you might have to do something you would prefer not to do to get there. So coming back round to everything they're saying, I mean, look, I've spoken on the issues in the sector a number of times, and at the end of the day, there is no silver bullet. Nothing is going to fix things overnight, but it's not the construction industry is not the basket case that some people would try to make us all believe. I don't think the sector thinks it's a basket case, but there's been a lot of media reporting around, the terrible state of our construction sector. There are a hell of a lot of really good operators in the construction sector at all levels. And I think there's been a bit too much of punish the many for the sins of the few. Failures happen in any sector. They tend to be high profile in construction because projects get stopped. But there does need to be some changes. There does need to be a better working culture across the sector. We've got to stop going, the first reaction being, is somebody trying to get one over on me? It's got to be, let's go and take some positive action instead of reacting to things. And often, and this is at all levels of the sector and all stakeholders, often acting emotionally about some of these things. Because at the end of the day, the only way that the sector is going to be successful is if everybody comes together and changes that culture. So working through things, communicating well, making sure that you do what you can to make your part of the business and the job that you're doing the best it can be, you can't control necessarily what other people are doing. You can control yourself, and that's where you need to focus your time. I repeat again that it's really important to make the best of the time that you have right now while there's not a lot of activity going on in the sector, to set yourself up to be ready for when things start again. And for the longer term future, if there are things that you can do to help improve your business, get out there and do them. I will say on this next slide, just ignore what we can do to help and the pretty pictures. The link down the bottom is a link to our website where we've got a COVID-19 page. On that page, there is a COVID-19 navigator. It's a little survey to try and help you figure out how the COVID-19 situation is affecting different parts of your business. And it asks questions for you. It's not something, we're not using it to collect data. It's there to help people. It's helping you understand where you stand. It looks at crisis management and response. It looks at things that might affect your workforce. It might affect your supply chain, finance and liquidity, so cash flow, taxes. There are some tax relief items out there that you can get, and what your strategies might be. So feel free to log on and have a look at that if you so wish. And that is where we get to questions. Tim.
Okay, can you hear me right? Now, can you hear me there, Lara? Because if you can hear me, everyone else can hear me.
I can definitely hear you.
Great. Okay. So we have a few questions. Do you think that private sector might be able to follow the government's kind of fair and reasonable approach? Do they even have the capacity? Is it a possibility? What's your thoughts?
I think the private sector should follow a fair and reasonable approach. I've spoken to a number of particularly lawyers who have been talking to their clients, and although the initial focus was on contractual requirements, they are now going, hey, this is, I hate using this word again, unprecedented. We're going to have to find a reasonable way to get through this. So it is about sitting down and talking about it. So I think there are a lot of good intentions out there to do that. Some of them may not be in a financial position to, but what you're going to try and get to is where they will tell you that honestly, so that you know where you stand with the project. Give it a shot. Nothing to lose.
Yeah. What do you think, as a small builder who's maybe contracting labour only to another builder, bringing in all their own tools, they don't have a lot to play with there.
Yeah.
What would be some of the advice for them in terms of trying to become a bit more financially resilient when they're kind of going job to job and don't have a whole lot of power in that?
And look, that comes down to making sure you understand what it is you need to operate. So how much money do you need in your bank account to make sure that if something like this happens, or you get a short period, that you're covered over that short period. Figuring out how much that is that you need to have your rainy day account. And then figuring out, well, how do you get there? At the moment, putting C19 aside for a moment, there are obviously the subsidy programs. There is some government-backed lending available, but you don't want to get into a whole lot of debt. It's about going, well, okay, what do I need to work with my contractors? And look, contractors can follow similar guidelines to what the agencies are being given by government. If you've got a labour-only supplier, a labour-only trade subcontractor, do you need to work with them to go, hey, should I be paying you weekly rather than monthly or fortnightly? What do we need to do to get you through this and help build you back up again? Because if the labour-only contractor fails, the project's going to suffer. So it's in the contractor's interest to make sure that they work together on it. Again, it comes down to communication and planning. You've got to know, you can't go to someone and just go, hey, I need some money. They're going to go, well, why? So you've got to understand, what does my cash flow look like? Why do I need some support?
Yeah, it's interesting. You could be sitting there thinking, I'll just sell the boat if I ever need to, and then you have something like COVID-19 and you find there's no buyers for your boat.
You can't sell the boat. I've still got 7 cranes sitting in a yard in Henderson. But look there, and you shouldn't have to either. It has to come down to, how do I want to run my business? What do I want to get out of it? But you do need to understand your business. Too many businesses in the sector operate from hand to mouth, or just go, well, when the cash starts to run out, then I'll worry about it. It's too late then usually.
And really seeing yourself as a business, even if you are just, a small band of builders, you know. Okay, this one's a little longer, so I'm just going to read it out for you. So, COVID-19 aside, a great amount of the focus of the construction sector prior to this was about managing the risk of litigation. It was structured around managing failure. In your presentation, you've spoken about outcome, which from this I've taken to mean performance or success. So if going forward, how should financial management change to focus on success? Are there any changes needed, or is success orientation fundamentally a better risk management approach from a focus on minimizing the cost of failure?
Oh, that's a long question.
Yeah.
I think there is a change in approach needed.
Yeah.
If say, preparing for litigation, you obviously need to make sure that you're contractually claiming financially everything that you can. But at the same time, being outcome driven means going, okay, if you get together at the start of a project and you agree on what the outcomes want to be and you work backwards from there, instead of getting to the start of a project and in the extreme situation going, how much money do I want to spend? And then trying to squeeze an outcome into that money. And how much cost do I want to spend? That's the shift that has to happen to avoid disputes and litigation and to avoid poor performance outcomes.
Do you know, and maybe the Accord has had a look at this, but is there a plan to look at the culture of the industry once we come out of this?
I think, I don't know, in the Accord, I'm not directly involved in the Accord. We're doing some work for people that are doing initiatives within it. But I think that's sort of like the overriding thing, is that a lot of the initiatives are to try and help change the culture in the industry. The initiatives are driven around going, this needs to be a more open, collaborative, work together culture. They go back to days, I'm not suggesting we all do projects on handshakes, but we've got to start talking across the different supply chain areas better to get the projects done right. Yeah,
we've the amount of paperwork now versus back 30, 40, 50 years ago, when building consent consisted of 3 pages of plans.
Ask a client whether they really want their contractor and the person who's running their project to spend all their time in an office poring over a contract instead of out there making sure that the building's going well.
Yeah. Is there anywhere that we can get data or see kind of sector health, the cash flow, the sub-tradies, head contractors, see this total sector debt, all this sort of things? Is there anywhere you can get that information to kind of have an idea?
There's not a lot of data out there that's available. I mean, obviously there's Stats New Zealand data that gets issued. One of the reasons
comes out that way.
The good criteria is being set up is to kind of almost create a benchmarking database for information about the sector. It's obviously aimed at vertical contractors in the first instance, but it's not inapplicable to others. It would just be different criteria that would go through. But the only way to build data is if the industry provides that data through some kind of mechanism.
That was one of the questions. Do you think, what do you think of having a financial stability rating system across head contractors and subbies?
Yep. So 2 things I'll say there. One, I've frequently been involved in during tender processes, most often for public sector entities, in doing high-level financial viability assessments of the tenderers as part of the tender assessment. But putting that aside, you don't want to have to do that every single time as a one-off. So the good criteria, the system that Master Builders is looking at rolling out, has the ability, because what it does is it gives you a benchmark you need to reach. It's not about going, this is your average or your above average, although we'll put out that kind of data. It goes, this is the target you're trying to hit to make sure that you are in the good zone.
Yeah.
And there is the possibility at a later date for that to be converted into an accreditation system. It would require more checking as opposed to an off-assessment tool, because otherwise you could put in whatever you like.
Yeah.
But it is designed to potentially expand to an accreditation scheme at a later date.
Okay, cool. One here, where can we go to discover how and what we need to include in a plan for small residential projects to be undertaken in COVID level 3? everyone tells us to plan, but I'm struggling to find guidance on the websites.
Yeah. I know that I looked at the Master Builders website earlier, and they said that the residential working group is preparing some guidelines. They haven't been brought live yet. What I'll do is I'll touch base with them after this webinar and just see whether they've got a time frame on that, and Tim, I can let you know, and you can perhaps pass that on.
Yep, cool. One here, interesting. I'm an importer distributor. What payment terms is best now breaking away from the 20th of the next month?
What payment terms are best are on what's best for whoever you are working with and how you can work together. There's no one answer at the moment. I hate to say.
Yeah.
Look, some people will, again, it comes down to being able to say to people, if I can evidence to you, look, this is a, be open and honest, I can evidence to you that if you don't pay me on 10 days turnaround, 10 days after invoice rather than 20th of the following month, I'm not going to be able to supply you because I'm not going to be able to purchase.
Yeah.
You may look to reach with some of your customers an agreement where they pay the material supply directly.
Yeah.
So that, and they only pay you the margin when it comes in. There are all sorts of systems. It's about going, let's find a way to work through this.
Yeah. Yeah, I know I asked you this the other day, but is there a way that we can restructure contracts to avoid kind of the Jenga tower that we have where, you know, the head contractor goes down and the whole thing falls down with it?
Yes.
Obviously, those subbies almost end up in a position where they're re-tendering for whoever picks it up later, but really everyone's gone down with the ship, you know?
Yeah, look, it's a horrible thing. And it is a little bit like, you say, Jenga tower or domino effect. The sector itself has been quite self-protecting. I know after Mainzeal failed, there were a number of suppliers in the sector that gave longer credit terms to subbies to allow them to get through the difficult times. So there's the sector helping itself and the sector getting together and rallying around. There are mechanisms about step-in if the client has step-in rights, but you've got to have a client that's capable of doing that. So the client can just take over. But it does come down to if assuming this is a contractor failure, I think that's what you're talking about, is don't be afraid to, as a subcontractor, to ring the receiver or the liquidator or whoever's looking after the company and saying, what's happening on this project? Is there a way we can get this thing up and running again as quick as possible? Because that is the way to mitigate the losses the most. There is nothing worse than seeing a construction site that sits idle for 15 months after the failure of a contractor.
Yeah.
And we had both extremes on EBIT, for example. We had one that sat for that long. Another one was back up and running in 2 days because the client came to the party and said, can we have basically a big meeting with all of the subbies? Do you mind if we do that to try and see if there's a way that we can get it back up and running? And we said, do it. You know, we're not here to hurt. So is there contractually something you can do? Look, there's the retentions regime has been pulled into play. It's not a fix-all either.
Is it working? Are you seeing that work?
Look, I actually think there's been a lot of coverage over the EBIT and Arrow one and how there were shortfalls. I think EBIT and Arrow are actually examples of two companies that did put the money aside in a separate bank account. The shortfalls that are talked about, apart from there was a small accounting error in one of them, which is not good, but wasn't intentional. The shortfalls are usually because those retentions hadn't been calculated yet. They were for the current month's work. Excuse me, I'm not coughing for any reason other than I've got a dry throat, I promise. You feel so bad coughing at the moment. So look, having a good relationship with your contractor, having a good relationship with how the client's going, especially if you're a key subcontractor on the job. On very large projects, the use of a project bank account can sort of ring fence the money on that project. Excuse me. But ultimately, the best way to prevent the onflow of losses from failure is to prevent failure altogether.
Now, whether you feel like you can answer this or not, but I still think it's a good question. How can or could government involve small building / consulting companies in the shovel-ready projects? Because that's the question. But if I had my thoughts, it's just it's classic to come out of this and see all the big guys soak up all the big projects, and then all the little guys, because it's simpler for government to work with a handful of big companies with capacity, and then all the other guys get left high and dry. Do you think there's a way that we can?
I think there are ways, and I do think they are thinking about that, because when you look at the way that it's been framed, there is the infrastructure shovel-ready projects, but even those are, it's going, how can we involve the wider sector, the resi sector, the civil sector, and the vertical sector to get them moving again? Thanks, Gary. I probably do need to be tested. And look, the large contractors will be going, most of the large contractors in the country, bless them, aren't out on the hammer and tools themselves. They use subcontractors. Yeah. So it's about going, hey, can I, do I touch base with some of the big contractors around and say, hey, I've got a labour force that was working on this, a small project, can't do it. Is there something that we can do for you on one of those bigger projects? The other thing that will play a big part is whether Kāinga Ora comes up with a similar scheme around residential projects. Because Kāinga Ora, previously Housing New Zealand and a couple of others, they don't just do big, massive residential developments. They do a lot of small building and 1 or 2 houses as well. So I think there is something there. It is going to take some time. There's a lot of people running around trying to do things very quickly, and it is about a little bit of understanding.
There's a bit of feedback in here from off-site manufacturers having issues with getting the bank finance and support. Have you had any experience with any of those guys and how they can access better bank funding when they're building off-site?
No, sorry, I don't. I mean, it does. Going for bank funding, you've got to have a valid and viable proposition, and the bank will put it through their standard risk and lending policies. I suppose it comes down to, are there other ways, and getting through it. If you're building off-site or building for your client, can they help with the funding process? Can you work together with them to get a joint funding initiative done? Sorry, I can't be more specific help, but it would depend on the situation. Yeah,
it's a bit hard. I suppose they just have a lot more cost all at once because they're trying to spit them out a bit faster.
Yeah, they have the cost up front. It's going, well, how do you fund that upfront cost? How do you capitalise your company so that you can do that? And that might be partnering with some of your ultimate clients to do that. So
this is a good one. Do we need an international benchmarking report to compare New Zealand against the OECD as far as build performance and figure out how we're actually going in terms of international best practice and, price per square metre and the quality of what we're doing?
Yeah, I think in some respects you can. In other respects, it's very hard to compare ourselves across with some of the other players in the sector, just because we are everybody is a different market, and we're a very small market. We're a long way away from a lot of places, which means some of our things are not easy to compare. We also probably have some of the data that's in those benchmarking is from a lot of big companies overseas, as opposed to smaller companies. And New Zealand is predominantly a small to medium business community. That's why, and look, to be able to compare some of that and do some of the efficiency and productivity, I think can be done. But to do that, we need to get the data on the New Zealand companies, and the only way we can do that is to get them to provide it.
That'd be interesting, because our rates are going to be different on materials and
they will be. But what we'll be able to see, if you can get a benchmark in place, you can get the data. You can then look at it 12 months down the track and say, have the initiatives that we've put in place, have they worked to make it better?
Yeah, especially now, and and what's cool is that these are some of the things that we can do better as an industry going forward, maybe with a bit more capacity now. Whereas in the last handful of years, everyone's been too busy to stop and look at it anyway. But like, I know the panel we have next week, that's one of the things that I would say that construction company has nailed, is actually having capacity to back cost every job, work out the things they did, and make all these little improvements all the way along. And most people don't have the time or capacity to be working at it at that level,
And look, maybe that's one thing you can do in the downtime. You go, what were my best 2 projects or best 3 projects over the last year, and what were my worst 3 projects? And can I see any patterns from that?
Yeah.
It will help me decide what to do and what to stop doing going forward.
Yeah. Okay, were there any other questions that you saw pop up that you want to answer, or?
I'm trying to read at the same time. Sorry, there's a lot on here.
There's one about NZS 3910, which is quite long.
I'm not a lawyer. It's probably the best answer to that. Is it possible? Are we talking about looking at different forms of contract? Is that the theory behind it?
Yeah.
Yeah. And look, I can briefly comment on that. I think there are different forms of contract. Some of them are more collaborative, but at the end of the day, that's the piece of paper that supports the principles that you should agree between yourselves.
Yep.
Cool. It's not the Bible.
Hey, well, thanks heaps, Lara. Really appreciate it. Really appreciate your input and taking time. Much appreciated. Like I said to Cameron last week, if we were in the room, you'd hear everyone clapping right now. Unfortunately, there's the awkward silence coming back.
It is that awkward silence, but I think it must. Oh, what is it? 3 o'clock on Easter, just before Easter weekend. It must be nearly 1 o'clock. But I do hope everybody has a happy and safe Easter in our little bubbles.
Yeah. And guys, in terms of next week, we've got, like I just mentioned, we've got the construction panel. So we have architect, builder, engineer who have been on a journey of some serious optimization. And in terms of what we were just talking about, in terms of benchmarking internationally, they were looking at international stuff. They were benchmarking their own works, and they've made some really impressive progress. So tune in next week to see that. Also at the start of that will be Cameron Baggery's little update. And also just to let you know, we'll pop this out in email as well, but we're actually going to bring forward the 4th episode with Louise to the Tuesday the 21st, because currently it's scheduled for Thursday the 23rd, which, all things going well, will be our first day out of lockdown, and there'll be a lot to be thinking about, and you probably won't have the time to sit down and jump into a webinar like we do at the moment. So we'll update that. Keep an eye out for it. 21st of April for that one. Otherwise, I think that's everything I need to say. Thanks heaps again, and it's been great, and we will see you next week. Cheers.